Okay. Abraham Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846. Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1946. Lincoln was elected president in 1860. Kennedy was elected president in 1960.
Wow.
Both were embroiled in civil rights issues, as we know. Both their wives lost children while in the White House. Both men were shot on a Friday. Both were shot in the head. Lincoln's secretary was named Kennedy, and Kennedy's secretary was named Lincoln. Both were assassinated by Southerners. Both the successors were named Johnson. It's
Get
true.
out of here.
Both were
That's
assassinated.
crazy.
No, absolutely.
Welcome to Far Out with Faust, everybody. I am Faust Chicho, and today I'm really excited to be joined again by my friend John Hammer. Let me tell you and remind you, in case you missed last week's, well, it might be a couple weeks now, episode, which we did on the Titanic. John is a geopolitical researcher. He's spent over 2 decades investigating, boots on the ground, nose in books, screens, uncovering the truth behind historical events. His first book, The Falsification of History, which I admit I am only about 3/4 of the way through, but there is so much. There's so many treasures in there. I cannot recommend it enough. That was published in 2012, following many years of intense research. That was followed by 2 sister books on the Titanic, which we discussed pretty lengthy in our last episode together a few weeks ago. Early 2016, he completed his largest work to date. It was Behind the Curtain, and that's an expose of the fraudulent bank and monetary systems that this world is now in debt to. In 2019, John published the results of his multi-year investigation into the JFK assassination, and that's called JFK, A Very British Coup. And that details the involvement of the British Crown in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. We are going to get into that today, my friend, because as many of you who are been following me and subscribed to me for a long time know, I'm pretty extensively researched into the assassination myself. So I'm so excited to be having this new perspective and learning. So also, he has another 2 books I got to tell you about. The Falsification of Science was published in 2021, and also his latest book is called Welcome to the Masquerade, a prelude to the coming reset, and that, of course, details the many events and well-laid plans leading up to 2020, 2021. You all know what I'm talking about. So without further ado, John, thank you again for being in with me, brother.
My pleasure. Good to be back.
I enjoyed our conversation so much. If you haven't watched it yet, check it out, everybody. But I thought we would pick up right where we left off, man, because we just start talking about, and this is kind of, there's so many layers to the JFK plot. So many entities, so many agendas. Everybody had their own reasons for wanting John and, to not be in charge anymore. So many people.
Absolutely.
But I have not learned. I only recently learned how heavily Israel and the Mossad was involved. Going through some two written books, the Final Judgment series by Michael Collins Piper. I want to say, I think his name is. But I'm excited. But and go ahead.
No, I was just going to say Michael Collins Piper is no longer with us. He passed away some years ago, but I had a very interesting live debate with him about the Titanic, about must have been about eight years ago, and basically, he didn't believe my version of the Titanic, but we had an interesting debate about it. So
that's cool. He was willing to come to the table and discuss it and debate it with you. Yeah, he died of natural causes, as far as we know.
I believe so. I'm not sure of the detail. I'm not sure of the details.
His books were pretty explosive, in their detail about the physical and literal involvement of Israel and Mossad in many events leading up to John and what happened to him. So really fascinating. And then they continue, of course, because the connection is there with the parasite class in America, aka the elite, which we should all stop calling them the elite. We should,
I know.
refer to them solely as the parasite class.
Yeah. I sometimes refer to them as the powers that should not be.
That's another great way to put them. The powers that should not be. But you said something in our last conversation. You said, in order to understand the British Crown's involvement in JFK, you have to kind of go back and understand the true history of what happened in the United States. And I thought that'd be a great place to start.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, that's probably the most critical part of the scenario, really, and it's the entire basis of my book, JFK: Very British Coup. I mean, a very brief history lesson. The British Crown Empire, or corporation, the British Crown Corporation, some call it, began roughly at the same time as the founding of the Bank of England in 1694, and its headquarters is the City of London. That is the square mile, not actual London itself, Greater London. It's just a very tiny portion of the city, which is roughly to the east of the very centre. So yeah, it's just 1 square mile, unlike Washington DC, which is, I believe, is about 10 square miles, is it? But yeah, and this city is home to literally hundreds of domestic and foreign banking groups, as well as the legal profession, all the major insurance companies, the Inns of Court, the legal Inns of Court, for those who understand how the British justice system works, and the media as well. And it has its own laws, it has its own courts, it has its own flag, it has its own police service, it has its own mayor. In fact, it's a city-state in all but name, in a very similar way to the Vatican City, which actually is a city-state, but also Washington, D.C. And that triumvirate of city-states basically rules the world. The City of London is the financial empire, the British Crown Empire. Washington, D.C. is the military empire, and Vatican is of course the religious one. So yeah, those three states together combine to rule the world in one way or another. So yeah, I mean, the city
is the world nonstop.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the city is basically the world's financial hub. And there's far more to this than I can probably go into detail about, because we want to talk about JFK, but this is just giving a bit of background. So I mean, a little bit more about it. It's right. Okay. We have to go back to the Declaration of Independence in 1776. Yeah. Okay, and at that time, America allegedly gained its independence from the British Empire, which it actually did. But that, unbeknown to most people, that only lasted 95 years. Because in 1871, the United States was on the verge of declaring bankruptcy. And it went cap in hand to the British Crown, as it was then, as it still is, and
the Bank of England.
aka the Bank of England, and asked to be bailed out. So, yeah, and the Bank of England, by the way, is the controlling, as I kind of touched on already, but it's kind of the controlling financial element of the world. It controls everything. It controls the International Monetary Fund. It controls the World Bank, and anything
stock markets,
of that.
Gold prices, right?
Absolutely. And so yeah, the price that the United States had to pay, and again, this is where I've said that I've given this kind of talk on podcasts to American audiences in the past, and some of them refuse to believe me. But it's very, very easy to find out. It's not hidden. You can go on, do the right search, and you'll find this information. It's not me making this stuff up. It's all out there in the public domain if you look hard enough.
That's
Yeah.
right.
So
Books,
yeah.
it's
So
not the internet.
absolutely, yeah. I mean, even the internet has it. This stuff is freely available. So yeah, what happened was, as the price that they had to pay for becoming free of bankruptcy, if you like, was to be subsumed back into the British Empire, and that is the state of affairs today.
Wow.
So unbeknown to most people, and I would include Brits in that as well, the United States is very, very strongly controlled from Britain. And this is kind of the background to, my book, A Very British Coup. And so we'll kind of, leave that
to incorporate. So I'm assuming that's right around the time. I'm just going to take a wild guess at this. I don't know this necessarily from my own research, but that is right around the time they had to create the United States Incorporated, the corporation that is now.
That is exactly correct, Faust. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, something just shortly after the Revolution and 1776 came the Treaty of Paris in 1783, and the Treaty of Paris was signed between, strangely enough, Britain and America, and it named the King of England, who was King George III at the time, as a prince of the newly formed United States. Now, King George III may, on the surface, have appeared to have rescinded his claims over the American colonies at the time of the alleged independence in 1776, but this Treaty of Paris maintained his rights to continue receiving payment for what was referred to as his business venture of colonizing America. And so, as I said, that was illegally suspended in 1871 after Congress, in order to avoid bankruptcy, had to agree to place the US back under control of the Crown Corporation. So yeah, there have been two constitutions in the US, and this is what, in effect, as you rightly said, created Washington D.C., the city-state, which was then and still is, wholly controlled by the British Crown Empire.
And for people who, I don't know how many people who are actually listening to my podcast who are going to have trouble accepting this, but I'm sure we'll have hopefully hundreds of strays just learning this information. But if you would like to verify, beyond books and simple research, which this can all easily be verified, by the way. This is not a theory. This is history. You have to look into the fact that the creation of the Federal Reserve and subsequently the IRS was basically illegal. I mean, it was against the very foundation of this country to put these kind of things into motion. Americans are deliberately kept ignorant about the fact that their birth certificates are more than a certificate. They're basically a contract that allows the state to tax you and to treat you like an employee for the rest of your life, as long as you remain in contract. And if for those of you who have trouble believing this, there are, I don't know the number, but there are, I'm sure, hundreds of thousands of people, if not more, in the United States who have figured this out, and in order to avoid paying taxes, have gone through, breaking that contract, which involves a series of steps, which you can do. And then they have no legal means to tax you anymore. Now, you also can't get a license. You can't, you know what I mean? Traveling is going to be a bit harder unless you're well-resourced, then you can get away with it. But make no mistake, I'm sure there are many people who are operating in this fashion who have the resources to pull it off. That's the biggest thing. But that's a fact. You can look that up and find out about that. There's books you can read, processes you can go through. If you no longer wish to pay taxes and be on the radar, you can become a ghost.
Absolutely. It's not an easy thing to do, apparently. I've not tried it myself. But as you say, there are disadvantages to that. And the disadvantage is that you can't take part in society in the same way as everyone else, because, as you said, it negates the fact that you can get a driving license and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's not I wouldn't necessarily recommend it unless you're, as you say, you're independently wealthy, and you can, you can bypass things that way.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
But
okay.
The reason why I brought that up, just, we were talking about whether it is a far-fetched notion that America was forced back into colonization due to bankruptcy, and any dealings with the Bank of England is dealing with the Rothschild family, and that is as corrupt an entity as is on the planet, as far as we know. So
absolutely. Right. So
yeah.
I actually dug out an interesting quote from my book. It's not myself. This is from an American guy, actually, by the name of Michael Edward, who wrote a book, and I'll tell you the title of the book when I finish telling you the quote. I think this quote just absolutely sums it up perfectly, the situation. Okay, and he said, "Neither the American people nor the Queen of Britain own America. The Crown Temple owns America through the deception of those who have worn their allegiance by oath to the Middle Temple Bar, Templar Bar, which is part of the City of London, and this is all to do with the British legal system. The Crown bankers and their Middle Templar attorneys rule America through unlawful contracts, unlawful taxes, and contract documents of false equity through debt, deceit, all strictly enforced by their completely unlawful but legal Crown Temple courts and our so-called judiciary. In America, this is because the Crown Temple holds the land titles and estate deeds to all of North America." Let that sink in. All of North America, not just Canada, the US as well. "Many of you are aware that the laws of this nation and its states," it's talking about America here, "were made to be in compliance and submission to the laws of England, only modified by state and federal law. You will see in this last chapter state statutes," and he's talking about his own book there, by the way, "from just a few of the original colonies that this is the case. Are these what are called ancient statutes? Yes." And then that continues. "However, since the King's Corporation is alive and well, as are his heirs, so is his trust and the law used to create and govern it. The law that governs his trust can only be amended. No law can be enacted contrary to the King's will and the Crown. The King's practice of granting lands in this country," again he's talking about America, "to those loyal to him continues, along with their land grants being protected by state ancient statutes, which are still on the books. We are governed by the King's nobles, just as in times of old England, self-proclaimed nobles and corporate trusts. They rule this country and the world. The huge corporations have been granted power and liberty not known by the common man. The nobles, real and the created, occupy their possessions as fiduciaries and trustees of the King's grants. Only if they remain loyal to the system, their privilege and lifestyle are their reward." And that is a book called The US Constitution Gave Legal Ownership and Control of the United States to London. And that's by a gentleman by the name of Michael Edward, who is one of your compatriots, Faust. So yeah, I thought that was very interesting. There's a lot of legalese stuff in there, but I think it kind of gives the right picture, as to just how sinister the whole setup is. It's so yeah,
it is.
It's yeah.
It's a hoodwink. It's a con. It's a great deception, and people are deliberately kept in ignorance because they don't want you to realize the illusion that this society is presenting to you every day, every minute of every day.
Yeah.
That, that you're a free person, that this is a free country, and this notion of democracy, which, is, people don't realize it yet, but democracy itself is a failed notion. I mean, sure, you usually don't have the body count that communism and socialism tend to create, but those are relatively new philosophies and political movements that were created by the quote Democrats in order to have opposition to
Absolutely.
them, someone to fight.
Absolutely.
It's fascinating.
Democracy. Who was it said? Democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what to have for dinner.
That's exactly right.
When we vote, we just vote for the lesser of two evils, basically, or what we perceive to be the lesser of two evils, but which in actual fact, it doesn't matter which one you vote for. They're going to bring in broadly the same policies anyway, because it's not them that are making those policies. It's people who sit above them. It's what we refer to as the cabal, or the powers that shouldn't be, as I said before. So democracy is a sham.
Yeah,
and it's there to give us the impression that we have a say in our own futures.
Right. So, but again, as long as you have a corrupt system incentivized by corporate greed, then you're voting into a system that is not for you; it's for them. So, quick question before I lose the thought. I was going to wait to the end to ask this, but knowing what we know about how presidents are selected, not elected, in America, and of course in the UK, it should go without saying, your prime ministers are selected. What do you think happened in 2016? I'm just curious. How did that anomaly take place, where you had, obviously Hillary Clinton is as deep state. I mean, she's a poster child, her and Bill, for deep state. And their connection with the Bushes and long-standing criminal careers. Yeah. How do you think they just did not anticipate and completely underestimated the silent majority in America, and the fact that so many would turn out to vote for Trump when they projected Hillary to just destroy him by a landslide? They didn't feel like they needed to put the work in and rig the vote. I mean, what do you think happened in 2016?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. Absolutely, precisely. Yeah, I think it took them by surprise. They didn't realize the kind of support movement there was for Trump bubbling under the surface. They assumed that it was just going to be a formality for Clinton to get in, but they were sadly mistaken. And of course, they didn't make that a mistake again the next time. No,
and they won't ever again.
No.
So I told everyone, I was like, listen, don't get your hopes up. 100 million people could turn out, and they'll say he lost by 100 million and one votes. That's what they'll say. There is no chance they're not gonna take any chances again. I think. And
of course, this is all facilitated by the electronic Diebold voting machines, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
They can program those to just produce the result that they want, which is exactly what they do. Israeli software within them, say no more.
That's exactly right. They've been doing it for 24 years now, at least, that we know of, that has come out in court cases and different testimony, people admitting that this is what they were told to do, as far back as 2000 with Bush and Gore, and it's wild that people don't understand how the seat of go ahead.
No, sorry, I tried to interrupt. I was just going to say, so basically that's a very, very broad, very thumbnail sketch of the background to it. So if we get on to Kennedy himself now, I think most people know that JFK's father was a guy by the name of Joe Kennedy, Joe Kennedy Sr., and JFK had an older brother, Joe Jr., who was killed on a suicide mission in World War II. Because originally it was intended that Joe Jr. should become president at some future date in return for services rendered to the establishment by Joe Sr. Now, Joe Sr., as you may expect of these bloodline families, he was totally corrupt. He made an absolute fortune from selling alcohol during Prohibition, and he wheedled his way into the establishment of America, the cabal, if you like, and certain promises were made to him, one of which was that one day a Kennedy, one of his offspring, would become president. And as I said, that actually ended up being JFK. JFK was unlike his older brother Joe, who sadly died in the war, in the sense that he was not brought up to be president. It was Joe that was going to be the blue-eyed boy, you know, the Kennedy president, if you like.
I won't go into
Yeah, exactly. I won't go into details at this point in time. I do talk about it in the book, but again, I'm aware of time constraints. But I won't go into details why. But obviously, when Joe Jr. died, the presidency was like the reluctant legacy of JFK, who had always been a rebel and not at all an establishment man, unlike his father and his older brother. So, that was totally unforeseen, and it led eventually to the to the assassination. But we'll look at a few more details.
Okay.
Yeah. From the very beginning, he was regarded as the people's president. He was a young, handsome, charismatic figure, which seemed to represent a new beginning for the country after the horrors of World War II. The effects of that were still being felt 15 years later when he's actually inaugurated. So yeah, he was the youngest ever president. He was the first Catholic to become president, and he was the first US president to be born in the 20th century. Just one or two interesting little snippets. Wow. So, but behind the scenes, all was not well. He was making lots and lots of enemies through his meddling in long-established and often corrupt practices, and his enemies, as a result of that, began stacking up quickly, and included the CIA, the vice president, Lyndon Baines Johnson. They were constantly at loggerheads. They absolutely hated the sight of each other. The CIA, as I say, the FBI, Big Oil, the Federal Reserve, the military-industrial complex, for want of a better word, who he was warned about by Eisenhower in Eisenhower's final speech as president, plus many others. But we'll just focus on these ones for now. I'll go through a little bit about the background to that. I think some people might find that interesting. Sure. So from day one, Johnson and Kennedy were at complete loggerheads. Johnson believed that Kennedy was a spoiled Eastern establishment brat, which is probably true, and Kennedy believed that Johnson was just an ignorant Southern redneck, and I think that was probably true as well. And they were in constant. Yeah, of course.
Lyndon Johnson was a total. I mean, he's as crooked and corrupt as they come. It was one of the fail-safes was making John run with Lyndon. That was one of the only ways they said that he would have a chance. That's the only reason why he took someone who he loathed as vice president. Yeah, well, he also needed the Texas oil votes as well, and that was and that came through Johnson, because Johnson was a Texan, wasn't he? And he had friends in Big Oil. Basically, he was in fact it was probably a puppet of Big Oil, but I don't know about that for sure. So yeah, they absolutely hated each other, and this was one of the things that Kennedy said. Let's look at the CIA first of all. And this is a quote from him, verbatim. He said, "I will splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it into the winds." So that obviously went down well with them, but that was just the beginning. That's just a brief overview of Kennedy's feelings and intentions for the CIA. I think that kind of speaks for itself. The FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, who was the long-time head of the FBI, he knew Kennedy was a serial adulterer, and he actually owned a secret file on Kennedy's, shall we say, extracurricular activities. And this obviously brought him into conflict with JFK. And again, I don't know whether American listeners have heard of this particular event, shall we say, but something in the UK called the Profumo affair, which happened in the early 60s when the Minister of War, John Profumo, in the UK, actually had an affair with a Russian spy. And of course, this caused a massive scandal. A massive scandal. But this event was also rumoured to be an elaborate honey trap by LBJ and J. Edgar Hoover to ensnare Kennedy and discredit him. And Kennedy did actually have an affair with that Russian spy, and her name was Mariella Novotny.
And as I say, she was the centre of the Profumo scandal in the UK, which dragged on for months and months, but Kennedy was also involved in that. So in revenge for that, the Kennedy brothers tried to discredit Hoover and have him retired.
He had a lot of dirt on. They had a lot of dirt on him too. The question was, who's going to play the cards?
Yeah. So again, looking at big oil, the big oil situation was that, of course, Kennedy was well known to be his own man. And he was abolishing long-standing kind of under-the-counter agreements and conventions within U.S. society. And one of these was something called the Oil Depletion Allowance. And the saga surrounding that. He introduced a crackdown on offshore tax havens and brought in new taxes on oil companies. And he also proposed the elimination of tax avoidance loopholes, which was very big in big oil. Yeah. And by the end of 1962, the big oil barons had calculated that Kennedy's measures would cut their profits in half. And basically they'd had enough.
Oh, yeah, that was...
Yeah. So the Kennedy administration had struck deeply into the heart of the Texan establishment and its economy as well, of course. None of which went down well.
Cuba, as well, which people don't realize the oil element involved with Cuba had been a huge expenditure done by Lyndon B. Johnson's exact people, by those families. We were, of course, selling arms and backing both the communists and the nationals. And then when the communists won, the first thing they did was say, the oil's ours, nationalize the oil. They took all the land back, which was a staggering amount of money that was just spent in those recent years. So much so that, I believe was the prime catalyst for the CIA's invasion of
indeed.
of the Cuba was those oil fields. So John was livid. Imagine an entity ordering an invasion of meanwhile, John is working his butt off, and I know John was no angel, but he tried to do right.
I think so, absolutely. I think he really was, trying to do the right thing. But of course,
he was trying
to
make
as we all
with
know,
Russia.
As we know, trying to do the right thing is not the agenda that the cabal wants you to follow. They want you to follow their agenda and only their agenda, and not pursue a kind of a contrary agenda, if you like, which is what Kennedy was doing.
Absolutely.
So, the next big entity that he upset greatly, and I think this was probably the final catalyst, the final straw that broke the camel's back, and that was the Federal Reserve Bank. Now, just a little bit of background for those who are watching or listening that don't know, but the Federal Reserve Bank is not a government institution. It's a private company with a monopoly on the issuance of US currency. Okay, and that's just a very brief snapshot of what it's about. So I believe that if it wasn't already sealed by this point in time, Kennedy's fate was absolutely determined beyond doubt in June 1963, because what happened in June 1963 was he authorized the introduction of more than $4 billion in US bills by the Treasury, which bypassed the monopoly of this all-powerful and ruthless entity known as the Federal Reserve. So on 4th of June 1963, JFK signed Executive Order 11110 into law, which effectively cut the Federal Reserve out the loop, and it stripped it of its power and effectively put it out of business, or it would have done if it had been allowed to continue.
Absolutely. And it would have also educated and allowed people to understand the fact that, hey, guess what? It hasn't been our Treasury printing this money at all. It's been this cartel which we have basically hired to put us into debt, which doesn't make any sense considering we have the power to print our own money through our own treasury. We can even loan it to ourselves without interest. It's our entity. It's our treasury. Accounting is obviously important, but putting yourself into bankruptcy isn't. Anyway, the first thing Lyndon Johnson did upon taking power was rescind that That was the very first thing he did was
absolutely.
Was get rid of the what do they call them, greenbacks? What was the nickname for them?
I think it was Lincoln's that were greenbacks, wasn't it?
It was Lincoln's that were greenbacks. That's right.
Yeah, I think so. It could have been Kennedy's as well. I'm not sure about that, Faust. So
maybe. Oh yeah, those two have that in common. That's right. I forgot.
Yeah, and I've got a very interesting correlation between Lincoln and Kennedy as well, which I'll come on to when I've gone through some of this. In his outgoing speech, Eisenhower warned JFK to be wary of the power of this entity, the military-industrial complex, and in effect not to go up against them. But as transpired, Kennedy just didn't listen. I mean, not only did he incur the wrath of the oil industry, he also crossed swords with lots of other powerful vested interests that I've not mentioned yet. The Catholic Church, for one, despite the fact that he was a Catholic. He really pissed them off big time. The military, organised crime, because of course organised crime is a... Yeah. Absolutely.
He fucked it. I mean, he made a deal with many of them, and then just completely reneged when him and Bobby got in. He sought Bobby on him. He thought he could use his office to protect himself, but he underestimated the fact that the CIA and all the entities which have which were created to remain rogue. It's always been an illusion that they were working for the state or even for the people. They're working for the money. Period. That's what they've always been. Yeah. Therefore, I think he underestimated, and because at that time it was really just completely becoming incorporated. And as we saw, the way that they went about assassinating John, they used all their assets in the mafia, and the intelligence agencies knew they needed the mafia, and then the rest is history. But
absolutely, and of course, all the elements that we've just talked about now, these are ultimately still under the total control of the British Crown Empire, as previously related. So much more detail of that is in my book. It's very difficult to do it justice in a short spiel, but and I mean I also present within that book massive evidence for massive MI6 involvement. MI6, for those who don't know, is the British equivalent of the CIA. Massive MI6 involvement in the plot, and I also outline in detail the role of a guy which most people have heard of called Ian Fleming, who actually wrote the James Bond stories, and also, I don't know if he's popular in the States, but a guy by the name of Roald Dahl, who was a children's author on the surface, but he was an MI6 agent. So he was deeply involved in it as well. So I mean, let's have a look at the official JFK conspiracy theory. In other words, the story that they reckon is the truth. I mean, the official version states that Lee Harvey Oswald, a disaffected, unstable guy who hated the US, was a secret communist and sought haven in the Soviet Union. And he quickly, from that point, descended into a spiral of hate and irrationality. He bought a rifle by mail order. He travelled to New Orleans, where he made a huge show of supporting Cuba, whilst consorting with an array of very, very strange and weird characters. And he then returned to Dallas, and he managed to procure a job along the route of Kennedy's proposed motorcade. And nowadays, actually, an interesting little aside, Oswald would probably be referred to as an extreme right-wing terrorist.
Oh, yeah.
Have you noticed how that seems to have flipped 180 now? Up until maybe 15, 20 years ago, the enemy was the hard left. Now it's the far right. I think that speaks volumes. But again, that's another story for another time. So,
we'll have to do it again. There's so much to talk about. Regarding, go ahead.
Sorry, go on. No, I was just going to continue with the official conspiracy. And then as Kennedy passed in his motorcade, he shot him dead with 3 shots in less than 5 seconds from a totally inadequate second-hand World War II rifle with a misaligned sight. It was then captured and conveniently assassinated by Jack Ruby, who was a nightclub owner, ostensibly, but he was also a known CIA asset. And the Warren Commission then was hastily convened and proceeded to compile this official conspiracy theory, whereby a deranged loner, stop me if you heard this story somewhere before, managed to accurately fire those 3 shots in no time at all at a moving target more than 100 yards away. And one of those magic bullets even managed to cause 7 separate wounds in 2 different people, which is incredible. Right. Yeah. So
who needs physics? Not only you have magic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Don't worry about physics. Yeah, that's just it's all lies, basically. So that theory wasn't only just impossible; it required that all the real evidence and eyewitness accounts be destroyed or ignored, and also upon the gullibility of the masses, which we know is probably the case most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why Jack Ruby assassinated him was not because he hated the guy for killing his hero or anything like that. It was because they couldn't possibly have allowed Oswald to go to court to tell his story. No. Just imagine the real truth coming out.
Never going to happen.
No, exactly. Yeah.
And Jack Rubenstein was not only a regular informant of the FBI, but he was also an informant from Mossad. Jack Rubenstein, Ruby is short for Rubenstein.
Yes.
So you have multiple connections, and I mean, Lee was a patsy. He was,
of course,
as big a patsy as they come. Really clueless. I mean, figured it out just in time to get killed in broad daylight in the middle of a police station downtown Dallas in front of 100 people, including reporters.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, that's how brazen,
Absolutely. Well, they don't care, do they? They're so arrogant in what they do because they know that they can concoct a fairy story that they will push so hard that it becomes the truth. Yeah, and even ignoring this idea of a magic bullet, this theory also necessitates this conspiracy theory that they came up with necessitates the ignoring of dozens of highly credible eyewitness testimonies to the contrary, including the officially recorded but ignored sightings of multiple gunmen of all at various points along Dealey Plaza, and also the discovery of multiple spent bullets and bullet holes of various calibers in various locations along the plaza. So, it kind of draws the picture of a hail of bullets, not just 3. There was a hail of bullets. Yeah. And many witnesses observed gunmen, plural, on the grassy knoll.
That's right.
And, but, a planned conspiracy such as this, facilitated by various factions of vested interests, that could only have been perpetrated and successfully covered up at the highest levels possible.
Absolutely.
And something so huge, so far-reaching, so outlandish could only possibly be posited by people like me, a tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy geek. Yeah.
Listen, hold your thought. I just want to. So everyone, I did 2 specials on this, in which I showcase a lot of literal eyewitness testimony, which was not, ever allowed into the Warren Commission, from people who were right there. So I have a compilation of all the things we're talking about. If you go back, we'll flash the thumbnail and the episode number for you. But I just want to read this so you understand just how true everything we're saying, how literally impossible the nonsense that they feed us is when these events go down.
Yeah.
Like physically impossible. And this is why critical thinking is so necessary, and not, having the reaction that they're trying to, instigate in us.
Yeah.
But this is from Mark, one of my favorite lawyers of all time, by Mark Lane. He was describing the magic bullet. I'll just, the bullet's formal name is CE, Commission Exhibit 399. But not unlike Irvin Magic Johnson, the basketball player, it is better known by millions for its nickname, the Magic Bullet. Here are some relevant facts. Let me just read this so people understand how insane. And they publish this in the Warren Commission, and they put the Warren Commission like in every grocery market, every gas station. This is the kind of propaganda, right?
Yep.
The evidence demonstrated that at least 4 shots had been fired and that one had struck a curb, causing a minor injury to a bystander. All the shots had been fired during a period of not more than 5.6 seconds, as demonstrated by a film of the assassination that served as visual evidence and as a clock for the shooting. The frames ran through the camera at a rate of 18.3 frames per second. The rifle that the commission claimed fired all the shots was an ancient and wholly inaccurate Leichter Carcano. I think it was the way you pronounce it.
That's right.
By the way, that weapon, when Mark Lane was speaking in Italy, and he told them that weapon, the whole audience started laughing at one of his seminars. And he said, "What's the joke?" And he said, that's always been our reason for losing World War I. We've always said that rifle was so inaccurate. It's the reason why we lost World War I. He was like, he was floored by it, because they were all cracking up. But the weapon, I'm continuing, the weapon with the hand-operated bolt action was tested by experts who testified that it required at least 2.3 seconds to reload between shots. And that was without time spent actually aiming the weapon. The president was seated in the back seat of the passenger side, and next to him was Governor Connolly. A bullet entered the president's throat from the front, causing a neat, small entrance wound. That's not how bullets enter a side, according to every doctor who had examined him at the Parkland Hospital in Dallas. Another bullet also fired from the front was the fatal shot. It threw him backwards into the left and drove brain and skull matter into the motorcycle officer to his left and rear. Connolly suffered numerous injuries, likely the result of being struck by more than one bullet. His ribs were shattered, his wrist was severely injured, and his left thigh was penetrated. The commission was distraught since it had begun and ended its inquiry with the irrevocable presumption that Oswald was the lone assassin and that he was using this Italian rifle. If one bullet had missed, as both the evidence and the Warren Commission revealed, then at least 4 shots, probably 5 or more, had been fired in 5.6 seconds. And with a weapon that required 2.3 seconds between shots, 4 shots could not have been fired. So, and that's just the beginning of how completely ludicrous and impossible everything that you've been told about the JFK assassination is. That is the tip of the iceberg. But I just thought it's worth reading.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, a lot of that stuff's in the book as well. But obviously, I can't cover everything. So, but I think I'll move on now to probably what I believe is probably the biggest piece of fakery of all, and that is the Zapruder film. Now, the Zapruder film, for those who are not aware, it's the film that I'm sure you've all seen, and it's the one that shows. It's very, very brief. It's 26 seconds, and it's a silent black and white film of allegedly of the assassination. Okay, now Abraham Zapruder allegedly shooting this film it was stood on a low concrete pedestal near the grassy knoll from where he allegedly shot this film that we're about, that we were about to see. I think it was something like 11 years after the event before it was actually brought into the public, and I'll come on to why that would be in a minute. Now, the official version states that Zapruder just happened to capture the entire incident on 26 seconds of film and 486 frames. There was no sound, but what the Zapruder film did was it allegedly allowed investigators and researchers to establish the interval between gunshots. Zapruder said he'd had the film developed, and then he had sent 3 copies. He sent 2 copies to the Secret Service and the FBI, and kept one for himself.
That didn't last long in his possession.
Yeah, absolutely. But okay. The complete Zapruder film was first broadcast on TV in March 1975 on Good Night America. I'm sure some people might be familiar with that program. I'm not myself, but there was a guy by the name of Geraldo Rivera. Blast from the past, but it was 11 years after the event, and then on the 16th of July 1999, a 3-member arbitration panel of the US government awarded Zapruder's heirs, because he was dead by this time, $16 million for the film.
Wow.
Now, and over the years, of course, the Zapruder film has been subjected to massive scrutiny. And, along with prominent JFK researchers, people like James Fetzer and Harry C. Livingston, I absolutely believe that the Zapruder film is a complete forgery from beginning to end. It's not just been tampered with; it is a complete forgery from beginning to end.
Wow!
And I believe that was a vital part of the conspiracy, and this is why it took 11 years before it was shown. Because it took so long with the technology of the 60s to actually recreate that and make it look semi-plausible.
Yeah. So that's a fascinating theory. I had a researcher on, and he's a photo analyst. His name is Robert Morningstar, and he's one of the people whose work matched Tibbet to JFK as a possible corpse double. And he kind of, just through passion and meticulous research into the, he literally stitched their faces together, and so there's a remarkable man who did a lot of work, and I had him on my podcast probably within like my first 75 episodes, but we had an incredible conversation about his work in that investigation, and he says that he saw a version of the tape where those frames were not cut out, because you don't need to be a scientist or an expert to see that there was frames cut out of that, by looking at it back then. So it's but I've never heard the theory that they concocted the whole thing like maybe the first CGI or whatever you call.
Well, there are several YouTube videos, and I would recommend anybody to look at those, and it shows in great detail how it was actually faked from beginning to end. It's really interesting. They're only short videos, and they're definitely worth looking up and watching. Now, I don't believe that Zapruder was actually just an ordinary bystander as he was painted. He was an active member of the CIA-controlled organization, the Dallas Council on World Affairs, for a start, and he was also, surprise, surprise, a member of the Skull and Bones Society from Yale University.
He was? I didn't know that.
He was, and he was also an active 32nd degree Freemason. Just a coincidence, though, Faust. It's nothing to worry about.
I had no idea.
Yeah. And also a member of those two organizations was Clint Murchison, who was a big oil baron, and D. Harold Bird, who owned the Texas School Book Depository, as was a lady by the name of Sarah Hughes, and she was the person who swore in LBJ on board Air Force One. By the way, have you seen that photograph
of him winking at the?
As though to say we did it. Yeah,
it's just. You cannot make this stuff up. Yeah. It's just the fact that a camera went off while he has his right hand up and is literally winking at one of his, people who were obviously in on it. It's just mind-blowing, man.
Absolutely. And there was a guy by the name of George de Morenschild who was absolutely up to his scrawny little neck in it, and he was a CIA contract agent, otherwise known as a hitman, and he was a close friend of Lee Harvey Oswald. Coincidence? I don't think so. But there you go.
No room for coincidence theorists on this podcast.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. And I'm sure everybody's heard of Jim Garrison, who was who had quite a prominent part in the Oliver Stone film JFK. Jim Garrison was a lawyer. Who and he was involved in the trial of a guy by the name of Clay Shaw. Now, Clay Shaw was the only person to ever have gone to trial over the assassination. Yeah,
right.
But
Clay Shaw was a renowned marksman, hitman, psychopath. He was.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was brutal.
Yeah,
and he was close with Lyndon, right?
Yes.
With Johnson. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I've got a quote, a shortish quote from Jim Garrison, which is quite interesting. He said, "The government's handling of the investigation of the murder was a fraud. It was the greatest fraud in the history of our country. It probably was the greatest fraud ever perpetrated in the history of humankind. That doesn't mean that we have to accept the continued existence of the kind of government which allows this to happen. We can do something about it. we're forced either to leave this country or to accept the authoritarianism that has developed. I mean, it was a long time ago since he said that, and of course, even if you left the country, it wouldn't have much of a difference. But yeah, he was aware of what was going on, and he was the trial lawyer. So yeah, no doubt in my mind that Oswald was a patsy, as we've already discussed. It's it's been proven many times by various researchers and firearms experts that, as you said, Faust, that it would have been impossible to accurately fire off 3 rounds from that particular weapon.
Just that alone, completely impossible. But interesting thing that came out of the Oliver Stone's film. Oliver Stone, in one of his first drafts, pointed the finger to where it belongs, in the absolute cooperation and facilitation by the CIA. But then Hollywood and the CIA are very close, and they told Stone that they won't let his film get made. He better point the finger elsewhere. So he kept the basic storyline intact, and people knew obviously that something was up, and they're okay with that. They're okay with people knowing that there was conspiracy as long as it doesn't point fingers at them, right? And what does the film do? It points, it shows clearly that what happened was not what they say happened, which is obvious to anyone, who looks into this in any true way. But also it just kind of points a vague general finger towards the military-industrial complex, not the CIA, not the oil. You know what I mean? So it literally was allowed to happen. A lot of good came from it. They were able to get Congress after that to reopen, a committee board that reviewed all the assassination records, and from that, I have a few big old books. That's how they were able to piece together the fact that the autopsy, the chain of what do you call it? The chain of not command, but the autopsy. There's a protocol in place, and that protocol cannot be broken. But they used this fraud autopsy, to put forth their quote investigation and their findings, which they had already decided on. But this shows how that was broken. That the chain of command was legally broken. Therefore, the autopsy results should be declared null and void by law.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So that came from the film. Just an interesting side note.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, in summary on that, it wasn't the Mossad or the CIA, the FBI, the mafia, big oil, the drug families, the military-industrial complex, Lyndon Johnson, the Catholic Church, pro-Castro Cubans, the Secret Service, or even the Federal Reserve alone that carried out the JFK assassination. It was, in fact, a combination of all of those, each playing a specific part, but all under the complete control and under orders of the cabal driven by the British Crown through its proxies, MI6 and SOE. The SOE is the Special Operations Executive. Again, I detail all the actual personalities involved in this in the book, but that's basically the summary. But again, let's look at a few more little facts. I mean, it kind of begs the question, why would they go to all this trouble and involve so many people in such an elaborate charade? Why not just arrange a convenient accident, as has happened to so many others over the years? Or why not just, for example, get an insider to introduce poison into one of Kennedy's meals? It's not a well-known fact, but Kennedy was actually not a well man. He was suffering from something called Addison's disease, which is a disease of the adrenal glands, and it causes extreme weakness, nausea, vomiting, low blood pressure, and it can easily cause death as well by adrenal failure. So it would have been easy to blame his untimely death on that. But no.
Send a message, though. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. You read my brain. You read my thoughts. So yeah, it was indeed to send a message. The perpetrators want to send this message and it had to be a strong message to any future incumbent, any future president who wanted to change the world for the better by closing down opportunities for major corruption. And so they hit upon this idea to perform a ritual execution that would totally shock the world at large and send strong echoes, down the decades, well into the future. And 60 years later, most people who were alive at that time, and I include myself in that, I was 11 years old, should give my age away now, I absolutely vividly remember that moment when I came home from school that afternoon, because obviously it was further on in the day, in England, we were kind of 6 or 7 hours ahead. Came home from school and saw it on the steam television that we had, in black and white, and everybody, even Brits, were absolutely shocked. And to this day, I can still remember that exact moment when I found out Kennedy. And this is what they wanted.
That's
and in
exactly
that,
what they wanted.
They were very successful. As I say, anybody of a certain age can remember where they were when they heard the news, just in very much the same way as 9/11. But so yeah, I actually, just a little aside, if I may, at this point. Have you heard of a American comedian called Bill Hicks? Sadly passed now. If you haven't, I would recommend looking him up, because he was a truther. Yeah, he died in 93. Okay. He was only 31 years old, I think. But he used to love talking about the Kennedy assassination, and I'll paraphrase here, but he had this little sketch that he did. He says, I love talking about the Kennedy assassination. He said, it's just an example of how a totalitarian government can use its influence to... Oh, sorry, hang on a minute. That's the speech for the docs tomorrow. No, he said, but seriously, what happens, he believed, was that whenever a new president is inaugurated, it's taken into this smoky room in the basement of the White House, and there's a group of all the industrialists that got him in there in the first place, and a big guy with a cigar says, "Roll the film," and the screen comes down and the projector starts rolling, and it's a film of the Kennedy assassination from an angle you've never seen before. And they sit there and they watch this film, and then the lights come back on, the screen goes up, the projector stops whirring, and the big guy with the cigar says, "Any questions, Mr. President?"
Yeah. That's it in a nutshell. That's what they did with that shot,
Yeah, absolutely. And okay, I want to talk a little bit about Freemasonry here, because this actually ties into it. This is very important. Freemasonry, as most people know, I guess, it plays a very important role in geopolitics. And most of the factions in this plot, unsurprisingly, as they all are intrinsically linked through Freemasonry. I don't mean the lower levels of Freemasonry, the guy across the street who's involved in charitable functions.
We all know your Uncle John was a Freemason and he was a great guy.
Okay?
We're not talking about him, all right? Everyone take it easy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. I'm talking about the higher echelons, degrees 30 to 33, basically. And within Freemasonry itself, there is an ancient Masonic ritual based upon the legendary murder of Hiram Abiff in King Solomon's Temple in Masonic legend. And just as here's a quote from a guy by the name of James Shelby Downard, who is similar to myself as a geopolitical researcher and author, and he describes it very well, so I'll read this out. It's pretty short. The killing of the king is a Masonic ritual dating back to the murder of Hiram Abiff in King Solomon's Temple in Masonic legend, which I've already said. Since then, the forces of darkness, in all their various guises, have used similar ritualized murders to dispose of their enemies all down the ages. The assassination of JFK was one such episode. Masonry does not believe in murdering a man in just any old way, and in the JFK assassination, it went to incredible lengths and took great risks in order to make the heinous act of theirs correspond to the ancient fertility oblation of the killing of the king.
Wow.
And that, so yeah, they use exactly the same MO with Princess Diana's assassination. But I mentioned earlier on, we're coming reasonably near to the end now. Well, I mentioned earlier on about the intrinsic links between the Kennedy and Lincoln assassination. Now, some people may have heard this before, but again, I detail it in my book. And there's a series of interesting coincidences, especially for all the fans of numerology out there. Okay, Abraham Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846. Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1946. Lincoln was elected president in 1860. Kennedy was elected president in 1960.
Wow.
The names Lincoln and Kennedy both have 7 letters. Both were embroiled in civil rights issues, as we know. Both their wives lost children while in the White House. Both men were shot on a Friday.
Wow.
Yeah, keep going, John. Both were shot in the head. Lincoln's secretary was named Kennedy, and Kennedy's secretary was named Lincoln. This is
Get
true.
out of here.
Both were No, absolutely. Both were assassinated by Southerners. Both the successors were named Johnson. Andrew Johnson, who superseded Lincoln, was born in 1808. Lyndon Johnson, who succeeded Kennedy, was born in 1908. And it continues. Let's see some more, shall we? John Wilkes Booth was born in 1839. Lee Harvey Oswald was born in 1939. Both assassins were known by their 3 names. Both names comprise of 15 letters. Lincoln was shot at the Ford Theatre in Washington, D.C. Kennedy was shot in a Ford Lincoln Continental car. How about that? Booth escaped from a theatre and was caught in a warehouse. And Oswald escaped from a warehouse and was caught in a theatre.
Oh, my God. That's right. Oh, my God.
Yeah. Interesting, isn't it?
I got to learn more about numerology.
Yeah.
That's.
I'm no expert on it, but, yeah. So, the cover-up, let's just talk very briefly about that. How was this cover-up facilitated? Obviously, the first step along the road was the Warren Commission report, which laid the blame squarely on Mr. Oswald, and the Zapruder film, which was only released 11 plus years after the event.
Yeah.
And, again, I detail a lot of this in the book, but at least 200 known to be connected individuals met very strange and unexplained deaths. Again, I detail that. Lots of them. And I'm talking about within the following year or 2. And there were also at least 6 or possibly 8 local and national news crews in attendance. Whatever happened to all that footage? I do wonder.
Wow.
There were 2 other movie films as well, home movie films from bystanders, which were confiscated by government agents and which have never seen the light of day again. And again, I go into huge detail of many of those strange and unexplained deaths in the book. I'm sorry to keep plugging the book, but it's my livelihood.
Not to mention
what the hell?
A dozen or more investigative journalists who literally were trying and gave their lives to try to bring the truth out, and they were literally cut down and met with multiple ridiculous accounts of like, they just happened to be walking they were thrown into to a river, or the ridiculous storylines they concoct for these. But go ahead.
There's a mountain of both circumstantial and physical evidence, plus hundreds of eyewitness testimonies, including those who didn't survive the cull, that points to high-level Crown Empire involvement in the assassination. So I actually believe it's fair to conclude that it was absolutely not an individual lone gunman, surprisingly, who carried it out. Neither it was an isolated group, been through all the different factions. Mm-hmm. I think each of those individual elements had their own specific agendas and motivations for carrying it out. But at the end of the day, it was a highly organised and coordinated campaign involving many elements of both British and American establishments.
What would you say the strongest evidence that, I'm sure you go into great detail in your book for everyone to check it out, but like that points to the Crown, besides the fact that the Bank of England is obviously, the Rothschild cabal and criminal syndicate is,
Yeah, I mean, it basically because all the elements that Kennedy upset were all in one form or another agents of the British Crown. They were all under the control of the British Crown. All of them, without exception. And of course, everything was all totally compartmentalized, as it always is, and designed to confuse and deflect any honest investigation with, obviously with the full, goes without saying, but the full complicity of the media. It's in society, it's the most effective way to bring down a politician or a corporate tycoon or a TV personality or a movie star is to smear them with allegations of sexual misconduct. So why were the perpetrators not satisfied with simply smearing and impeaching Kennedy, which it could have been? Simply impeaching him for sexual misdemeanors was nothing like enough. And again, it comes back to this. They needed to send out a message because Kennedy was murdered by the British Crown. It was a loose cannon. It was affecting their operations. And for the sake of their own insidious agenda, they had to do it in such a way that would leave an indelible stain on the pages of history.
Yep.
Create
and
a legacy.
The minds of everyone alive,
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're coming to the end now. This is just about it, I think. Ritual public execution is not the easiest nor the simplest solution to the problem. It required lots of intense cooperation and several hundred people and many, many man-months of coordinated effort,
Years,
yeah, probably. I don't know how true it is, actually, but I kind of cover it a little bit in the book again. But I did read something, and it seemed fairly convincing, that he was actually meant to be assassinated in Chicago the previous month. But apparently it leaked out, and so they had to can that. But I don't know. I'm not sure about that because I think it would have taken more than a month to actually rearrange it for Dallas.
Yeah, but, I'm for years afterwards though. This cover up had to be maintained and maintenance and cleaned up and dusted and made sure that they had to find out who was getting too close to the truth and then take care of them and get the media on them or get their agents on them. But so what your book does is it goes through all this, obviously what we just talked about, but does it also compile the British Crown's involvement and how you were able to discover it? Because that's something we don't hear about in America much about, like we hear the Mossad, the Mafia, obviously the CIA, but we don't hear a lot about.
Is that not a clue in itself, Faust, do you think? The fact that we never hear about it.
I'm just wondering, like, what, how you compiled and even got onto it. I mean, I guess knowing what you know, that would be the first place you look.
It's just rabbit holes upon rabbit holes, going down various ones leads to another. And some of this stuff is probably very, very difficult to find now. I'm going back kind of 15 years or so when I began looking into it seriously.
Yeah.
But obviously the plain fact is that since 1963, no one else has dared to stand up to the establishment in the way that Kennedy did.
Not even close.
No,
they haven't even talked about it. And that was, I tell everyone, that's the last time that they were going to take any chances. If you know what Operation Northwoods was, and you understand the fact that Operation Northwoods was presented by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the President of the United States. Operation Northwoods, for everyone who's been living on the moon, was a series of proposals for the president to approve or disapprove actions that they would take with the United States, armed forces, assets, agencies to invade Cuba. And among those on the list were things like, we could hijack some airliners. We could fly them into buildings. No, we can sink a cruise ship. No. Better yet, and we'll blame Cuba. Then we can go in, we can invade, we could take the oil. And John was like, no, 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 no. And they were like, what are we doing? Why are we asking why haven't we sorted this out? The president should not. we cannot leave this to the man who's in charge, and that's
no.
It just became very, very evident to them that there needed to be complete separation and
Absolutely.
plausible deniability became, their absolute operating agenda. So
yeah.
It's just
I'll just one final word really on this topic, sure. And that is, I when I do this as a stand-up presentation, I because I travel the country doing presentations, and this is one of the ones that I do. Everybody says, well, who specifically did it and how? And I'm sure everybody out there is asking that question, but I'm sorry, but that would be telling. No one really knows for absolutely sure anyway, but all is revealed in my book, JFK, A Very British Coup. So if you want to know the answer to that question, then just to let you know, I absolutely detail the names of the people who actually committed it, who actually did it, who were on boots on the ground, and
with rifles in hand.
Yeah, and I name and shame the actual assassins and their locations along Dealey Plaza. So
nice.
There you go.
So check out the book for everyone, because I get a lot of people who are longtime, fans and researchers and have done their own studies, and I love when they comment on my videos, because I know if I've shared something new with them, then all the work was worth it, because they kind of know a lot. But
sure.
Man, John, there's so many things that we're gonna just have to do this again.
Let's make a series, shall we?
For everyone who's listening, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. If you're listening on audio, drop us a review, a comment, let everyone know what you thought of the video if you enjoyed it. I'm gonna probably have John back, but let me know what we should go into. Check out his books; they're amazing. The Falsification of History is a compilation of awesome information. So if you enjoyed this podcast, let me know what you guys want us to cover on our next one. We're going to create a series, I think. And don't forget to subscribe and like and share. Thank you guys so much.